Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming to the third talk in the Information and Media PhD series. Before I introduce Dr. Holt, I'd like to remind you that the next talk will be Friday the 13th in December, and that will be Amy Gonzalez from University of California, Santa Barbara. So I hope we'll see a lot of the same faces that afternoon. So today we're really fortunate to have with us Dr. Lanier Holt from the Ohio State University. Excuse me, so sorry. He is an assistant professor in the School of Communication, and his research sits at the confluence of journalism, media effects, and social psychology. But in addition to being a prolific researcher, he has also been recognized as an excellent teacher. I believe that was in your first year at The Ohio State that you received that prestigious award. But he also comes to us with expertise in, as a professional journalist, he worked for the Chicago Tribune and the Indianapolis Star, and he also has professional experience in public relations. So we're really excited to hear your presentation today, and let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. And for the record, I had absolutely nothing to do with the "the." How many of you have ever been to Ohio State? They are dead serious about the "the" too. They actually sell paraphernalia with just the word "the" on it. And my wife, who's a professor at Ohio State, is like, "I hate this. This is ridiculous." I said, "Guess what you're getting for Christmas?" So I might be at Michigan State. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, the topic should tell you pretty much exactly what I'm going to discuss. Anyone who's ever met me, anyone who's ever hung out with me will tell you I'm a very direct person. And the topic is basically, is there anything that can be done? Specifically, when you look at me, a lot of people are you an athlete? And I'm like, seriously? But worse, should I be concerned about you being here? Because I feel unsafe because you're a 6'3", 6'4" 250-pound black guy. Which makes me wonder, is there anything that can be done? Originally, this topic was called something a little more insidious. It was based on something a student said at Indiana University. And it was titled, "We're Not the Niggers You Saw on TV Last Night." Because he said that's what he wanted to tell one of the parents. Because when they do the tours, one father literally shielded his daughter when he walked by. Never met him, never saw him. And he just wanted to tell him, "We're not the niggers you saw on TV last night." Ladies and gentlemen, this is a dark time. And when that student, Sean Ryan Johnson, said that about 5 or 6 years ago, that wasn't today's time. Today's time is very different. And those of you who are in the back and can't see it, this guy is the governor of Virginia in blackface for Halloween. Thought it was a good prank. Virginia, we'll double back to that. Maryland lawmaker apologizes for calling an all-majority black county a nigger district. Alabama. Newspaper editor calls the Ku Klux Klan to return and clean out D.C. His wife, Virginia's first lady, gave some black kids cotton as a way to have them envision what it was like to be slaves. And she thought that was a good idea. Right now, we're in a period where hate crimes are up and the number of hate groups is at an all-time high. In the 1920s, blacks were getting lynched at almost one a week. There's more hate groups in almost 2020 than there were in 1920. 2019. The United States of America, Southern Poverty Law Center, those are the hate groups across the country. There's a hate group in every state of the union except Wyoming. We shouldn't be exactly happy about that because there's about 12 people who live in Wyoming. And they used to have one right there. I guess they realized, wait a minute, we got no black folks. Who we hating? Michigan has 31. Total in the U.S., 1,020. Do the math, 50 goes to 1,000 20 times. We're a little ahead of schedule here in Michigan. Probably surprises no one. especially in the wake of police shootings, Mike Brown. Or as people remember Mike Brown, left on the streets of Ferguson to die like an animal like they used to do back in slave times. Leave them out so people actually see them, to leave as a representation or as a statement of what will happen if you try to defy us. Even professional athletes were talking, we can't breathe, after Eric Garner. Keep in mind, we haven't even entered the South. This is on the streets of New York for the oh so horrible crime of selling loose cigarettes or taking on rough rides on the East Coast. Shot while selling cigarettes, shot after leaving convenience stores, shot like Walter Scott in the back of the head and in the back while running away. No charges, because the police said we feared for our lives. One of the courses I teach is crisis comm, and my students said, well, of course they did nothing wrong. There were no charges. I said, that's not what no charges means. No charges means that the police actually followed procedure, which is to say, if police procedure theoretically called for them to shoot a suspect in the knee to protect themselves from fear of getting attacked, there would be no charges because they didn't violate their own rules. This doesn't mean that it's right. That just means that they didn't do anything that they considered illegal, and they investigated themselves. But it's not just the police. Black Lives Matter movement started in Florida after an erstwhile neighborhood watchman said these people always get away with it. A teenager, probably about the age of a number of you 4 or 5 years ago, Skittles, soda, feared for his life. Well, the Black Lives Matter movement started because people said, well, if things were flipped, this is a cute little white kid gunned down by a large black man, things might have been different. Which takes me to the point of my research. What, if anything, can be done to change people's perceptions of people of color, in particular African Americans? It grows out of the civil rights movement. In short, why is it that we're perceived as criminals? Disproportionately more likely to be thought of as violent. Even when we're bearing gifts, we're taken into custody. That picture, I believe, won the Pulitzer. She was taken into custody. My research examines race perception in several contexts: in journalism, social media, social psych, health comm. But why are media so important? Well, we like to think that, in this total mediated world, that we actually get to know a lot of people. We actually get to go out and meet tons of folks. I mean, we have cars, planes, those little scooters that I always want to clothesline someone on who rides them like 50 miles an hour. Is it just me who wants to do that? Because literally all the time I'm like, no, don't do that. You're a faculty, you can't do that. But I'm from Chicago. Well, guess what? People, despite the ability to go out and meet as many people as you want, don't. Very little today that we know about the world comes from firsthand experience. Increasingly, what makes up the difference between what you know about the world from firsthand experience and what you've come to believe is made up by what the media tell you. In short, reality isn't what you experience directly today in today's mediated world. Reality is increasingly how the media influences your perception of something long before you encounter it. And that goes with events and, unfortunately, also people. But there's lots of other groups. Why black folks? Well, obviously, I'm a little biased. But that's not the only reason. There's something different about black skin in the United States. And there always has been. As I look around this room, I can just guess. We have Polish people, Jewish people, Italian people. All of these groups at some point were alienated. But eventually they all got to move into being white. People don't say, I'm not white, I'm Italian, unless it serves their needs. But all of these groups have been made to assimilate and be considered white. People talking about baseball being an American pastime, I say, yeah, it is. But you know what's really a reflection of America? Boxing. You look at the heavyweight division. You saw guys like Rocky Marciano. You know why? Because the Italians were at the bottom of the rung. You saw the German Americans, you saw all sorts of groups. But there's always been one group always represented in the heavyweight division. Blacks. People don't let other people hit them in the head for money if they have other options. And blacks historically have always been calcified at the lowest rung of the social hierarchy in the United States. In fact, it's even in the very Constitution. Blacks are the only group, period, in the United States who had their humanity questioned legally by the 3/5 clause. Blacks, according to the Constitution, only counted as 60% of a human being, and they were counted only for taxation purposes. If you ever wonder if this still has any ramifications today, look at your electoral college. Right now, it takes 270 votes to become president of the United States. 135 of them are in the 13 Confederate states. Because this holdover, the representation that the South had, because they could count their slaves. We haven't changed a whole lot of that. If you want to become president, all you have to do is if you march through the South, get all of those, you're halfway there. But also theoretically, Sri V. Ramasubramanian down at A&M found out that, after she did this at Penn State, it's harder to change people's opinions about black folks than other groups. If you're doing counter stereotypes, it's easier to change people's opinions on Asian Americans. It's easier to change people's opinions on Indians, as in people actually from India, not the people that Columbus thought he discovered. But black folks, she theorized, there's such a long history. There's such a reputation in the United States that changing the opinions of blacks is harder than changing the opinions of other racial groups who immigrated here. And why media? Well, media are the foremost primers of perception. And disproportionately, when you see black folks on television, you see negative images. In fact, it has gotten to the point where politicians no longer even have to bring up race when they're talking about crime. They can just say we're getting tough on crime, and that's code for locking up more African Americans, disproportionately African American men. People ask, how did Hillary lose the election? Oh yeah, she didn't go to Michigan or Wisconsin as much as she liked, but she didn't get the black vote. Oh yeah, she got the 90%. Donald Duck gets the 90% if you're a Democrat. But she didn't get the numbers because of a statement she made back in the 90s. Young black men essentially are super predators, and they must be brought to heel. And she never apologized for that. So we were like, Trump? Hillary? I'm watching the Knicks tonight. Well, Mary Beth Oliver and a number of other scholars found out that this image of the black criminal, talked about by politicians, discussed in media, is so ingrained that when you do a research and say, here's a crime, here's the people who committed it, let's cover it, then ask people 2 weeks later, the most common mistake that people will make is remembering or misremembering the crime that was committed by a white person was done by a black person. And disproportionately overrepresenting the amount of violent crime that African Americans actually do. And what's worse is when people say, oh, I can't wait for the old people to die off so this racism will go. All of this was done on college students. It gave rise to what scholars call the black criminal stereotype. The idea that if a black suspect and a white suspect are accused of the same crime, people will say the black suspect is more likely to be guilty, deserves stiffer punishments, up to and including the death penalty. But that presents a complex picture. Some scholars, like Professor Pia at Ohio State, says that whites show no racial preference in their media selections. It's usually based on self-report measures. But Wittenbrink, looking even deeper at social psych, found, you know, whites are really interesting because there's some white folks who love black folks. Some of y'all might even be in this room based on the fact that you're here, unless it's extra credit, of course. Love black folks, like black folks more than white folks. But ultimately, what we found is that white folks are complicated. And by complicated, I mean sneaky. White folks will hide their racial beliefs when it fits their needs. In fact, they even tell my students at OSU, not to be confused with the OSU, same place. No one wants to be considered a racist. Even the Klan says they're not racist. They're white supremacists, as if that's different. Being a racist is the second worst thing you could be in society today. So my students are always like, oh, what's the worst? Pedophile. Think about it. You find out there's a racist next door. Oh, shit. I gotta leave. No. Well, let's just talk to him. There's a pedophile next door. I'm out. I'm moving. White social tuning. But it presents a very complex theoretical picture. The positives is that, well, the negative is that people learn from the media. Research also shows that when being absolutely candid, as many as 1 in 2 whites have a negative opinion about African Americans. In fact, Hickman and Rojecki found, because people learn from the media, what do the media actually say? So they did a content analysis looking at television stations all across the country. And they said if you watch TV, specifically local news, and I say local, and they use local news because people get all excited when they hear about how many people watch Fox, how many people watch CNN. Newsflash, no one cares what they think. If you took all of their viewers, combined them, they're less than the number of people who are watching commercials on ABC. Most people get their news from the major 3. Well, if you watch local news across the country, it gives the idea that America is a nation of whites, in which immigrants and blacks interrupt mainly to cause problems or when they need some help. But there are some positives. Professor Appiah found that only black people show these preferences for themselves. It's not white folks. But the reality is also, beyond just Appiah's work, not all whites are racist. Newsflash, Obama got the white vote. Since 1968, between 88 and more than 95% of blacks have voted Democrat. So it's not, well, Obama ran, so he got the black vote, so he won. Hillary got the black vote, Jimmy Carter got the black vote, Gerald Ford got the black vote. Blacks don't vote Democrat, they vote non-Republican. It could be me, it could be Salim, it might even be, well, maybe not Dave. It could be some decent, it could be Dr. Thorsten. If you are running, you are going to get the black vote if you're a Democrat, percentage-wise. But how many will that number be? Barack won because he got turnout. But he also got white folks to say, you know what? I'm willing to vote for him. That whole election changed at Iowa. When Barack won Iowa, all of a sudden, excuse me? A dude with a name that rhymes with Osama won and Lily White has Iowa? And Hillary was like, oh my God. People don't realize Barack lost every state after that up to South Carolina. But it was over. He got the white vote. Which, of course, presents the quandary because there's some racist white folks, there's some social tuning white folks, and there's some white folks who love them some black folks. Whites' racial views are best described as multifaceted. So what's my contribution to the field? Well, so I did a study with Morgan Ellithorpe. How many of you know Morgan? Good. And you'll see these 2 asterisks, and I'll tell you why they're up there in a second. This is a paper that appeared in Media Psychology, because one of the things you find is that when it comes to self-report measures, people will always tell you the things that they most want you to think to make them look less heinous. So we did a study that examined the role of people's pre-existing attitudes and their motivations and their perception of what they think of a racially charged issue. Because not all whites are racist, so how do their motivations, their pre-existing attitudes that they bring with them before they even read the news influence what they think of media messages? The theory is framing. Dave Eagleson hates framing, which made it even sweeter to do framing. Framing is basically the way the media basically take two particular aspects or some aspect of a perceived reality in order to promote a particular definition, interpretation, cause of action, etc. And there's two types of framing. There's episodic framing. Episodic comes from the root word episode, which means just like one instance. Say, for example, if I hit this guy in the face, he hits me back, all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, Holt is going crazy. Why in the world did he punch this guy, such and such and such? He's the reason this fight started. Thematic puts it in some sort of perspective. You find out, yeah, this guy broke into his house, he attacked his kids, such and such and such, then Holt hit him, then all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, he should have been hit. Most racial coverage and most coverage involving African Americans focuses on crime, and it tends to be episodic. One strike, one hit, that's the solution. They used it a lot at Katrina, for example, and they show a black kid looting. And they say, he's looting this, he took this from a store such and such and such, or whites find it. If you said, yeah, he broke into something, he's taking a loaf of bread, of course he's a criminal. But if you find out, well, his house is floating underwater, his brother is starving, his mom has a broken leg, she can't get anywhere, the store was already closed, he had to go get something, so he broke in. All of a sudden, he's not a criminal. You're more likely to blame cultural factors of the environment more so than the individual. That was the theoretical basis of this study. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. I'm going to simplify it because it's a whole lot of words. I remember sitting in your exact spot thinking to myself, am I supposed to read all this? Yes, you are, but I'm going to blow through it. We use the personal implicit association test, and the main reason is because when people ask, are you racist, are you not racist? Of course they're going to say no. But one of the issues is, with the PIAT, we look to see how well you can match positive and negative. Say, for example, if we say sunshine, white, donuts, white, and then we say sunshine, black, how quickly can you match those? People tend to not be able to match things that their mind doesn't look at as congruent, as quickly. And as I understand it, the disparity between your ability to match white with good and black with good speaks to your latent racial beliefs. It's different than the IAT, which just asks sort of a third person effect, like, what do you think of this? What do people think of that? It asks your own personal beliefs. And we looked at the role of motivation in terms of internal and external. Internal is, what do you actually believe? What do you actually want to have happen? What do you believe in your soul? Versus, hey, what do you want people to think of you? That's external. 87 undergraduate students from a large Midwestern university, shockingly, it is the Ohio State University. And they read episodic or thematic stories about the Gen 6 incident. Part one of the procedures, they completed the self-report measures about their motivations to control prejudice against African Americans. And they also completed a race-related version of the PIAT. Part two, they rate 3 stories about the beginning and middle and aftermath of the incident. Now you're going to see why those asterisks were up there. But first, a refresher on the Gen 6 incident. 2006. 2006, a black kid asked at an assembly in the northwest hamlet of Jena, Louisiana, can I sit under the whites' tree? And it was called the whites' tree because only whites were allowed to sit under it. The school principal, I believe vice principal, said you could sit anywhere you'd like. So he sat under the whites' tree. Shortly thereafter, a noose, or nooses were hung on the tree as an indication that, boy, you don't get out of your place here in Louisiana. All hell broke loose in Jena after that. Black kids, white kids having fights. White kid actually pulled out a shotgun on a group of black kids. Somehow, I don't know who these brothers were. They got the shotgun from them. The black kid who stole the shotgun was charged with theft. The white guy who pulled it on him was charged with nothing. It all reached a head when the black kids and the white kids got into a fight. 6 of them beat up a black kid and stomped him out. In the parish of Jena, Louisiana, you have to use something in your statement to charge someone with murder, the attorney had the black kid's tennis shoes listed as a murder weapon, and they were charged with attempted murder. Jenna's very much unlike a lot of the United States. Blacks and whites obviously get their haircut at different places, but they also are very segregated in as much as they're still even buried in separate cemeteries on separate sides of town. Those are what you'll see in the slides later, are cultural factors that we'll be looking at. And oh, by the way, that white kid, not only did he survive, he was well enough to go to the class ring ceremony later that day. But those black kids were still charged with attempted murder. Some people said this harkened back to the worst days of the civil rights movement and the system of double standards with regard to jurisprudence of whites and blacks. Now, I don't know if that's lightning, but we're getting the hell away from that side. And this is the reason those two asterisks were up there. How many of you have ever gone to an academic conference? AJ, ICA, etc. This is what happens at those conferences for those of you who haven't gone. They put up about 10 hypotheses, and they're all about a paragraph long each. By the time they get done reading those, you forget what the hell it is that they were actually trying to figure out. So I put those two asterisks up there to let you know I'm going to go through these quickly, and basically I'm going to show you what they're about, because you're not going to remember what they are. I'm going to touch on these. Hypothesis 1 looks at implicitly measured attitudes, seeing what it has on people's impressions of African Americans in a story. Hypothesis 2 talks about prejudiced and non-prejudiced people and how they're going to view the favorability of the story. Hypothesis 3 asks, will people's story quality be moderated by the effect of their prior attitudes? Hypothesis 4 looks at the perceived story quality of blaming cultural factors, and if it will be moderated by story frame. Then we ask a research question. And you'll see the reason I'm going through this, because in short, this is what they are. Hypothesis 1 looks to see if your implicitly measured attitudes influences what you think of the quality of the story. Hypothesis 2, does your external motivation influence that? Hypothesis 3 looks to see if your perception of the story quality leads to you thinking either the environment of Louisiana or Jenna, Louisiana, and had anything at all to do with what you thought about the story quality. And this hypothesis 4 looks to see if story frame affected that. And you can see what the research question does. Here are the results. What we found was people who have negative implicit attitudes toward African Americans, which means just at an inherent level, they do not like black people, and they were not externally motivated, which means you don't like black people and you don't care what people think in terms of if you hate black folks. Thought the story was of poor quality. Outright blatant racists, when they read a story about a racially charged issue, they think it sucks. However, whites who are highly motivated to appear less prejudiced, regardless of their actual beliefs, in other words, if you have a great desire for people not to think of you as being racist, regardless of if you're racist or not, you're going to think this story is good, and you're going to tell people that it's great. In short, what we found initially is what people think of even a story where people talk about the possibility of blacks getting lynched, or at least the threat of it. When people talk about black kids going to jail for murder, for a fight, the key determinant in what they think of that story has absolutely nothing to do with the story itself. It's what they want people to think about them. If they want people to think they're not racist, they'll say it's one way. If they don't care, they will say something else. People who have negative attitudes about African Americans but wanted to appear non-prejudiced reported the same perception as those who had more positive attitudes. People who socially tune and say, you know, I want people to like me and think I'm not racist, as opposed to people who legitimately aren't racist, the people who love black folks, when given self-report measures, say, this is an absolutely great story and we need to hear this. Story quality was also significantly affected by story blame, in as much as people were significantly more likely to blame cultural factors, racism in Jenna, segregation in Jenna, etc., for the cause of the incident when they read thematically framed stories. Put in layman's terms, when people read stories about racism, racist attacks, etc., if you put the entire issue into context, people are more likely to understand what's going on with racism. Versus if you just describe it as, hey, some black kids beat up these white kids, then all of a sudden, yeah, these black kids are thugs, they're criminals, etc. The more negative whites' implicitly measured attitudes were towards African Americans, which means the more racist they are, the worse they thought the stories that they read about race actually were. Doesn't matter if it's the best, it could be in Time, it could be in New, doesn't matter where it is. The more implicitly racist you are when reading a race-related story, the more heinous you think the story is in terms of quality. Takeaway messages is motivation matters. Because white social tune. They gauge their environment, they look at the people who are with them, and they decide, do I want these people to think X about me? Is there this much of a risk to my reputation to appear a certain way? If there is, guess what? They'll say and they'll do and they'll make you believe that they think a certain way. In all reality, that couldn't be further from the truth. They can be as egalitarian as the least racist person you know. Person who's like, some of my best friends are black. Could be as racist as anyone else. And pretend that they're not, if they're motivated to do so. In fact, whites who lack the motivation, we found out it's not so much that they just think this story sucks. They don't even process the messages imbued in the story. It could be, well, this happened, that happened, that happened. I'm not even paying attention to it. In fact, they basically write this off as fake news. They don't even pay attention. You ever wonder why you can't convince these people? It's because they're not paying any attention at all. Did you even read the message? You see that all the time on Facebook, on the thread. Did you read? Did you see? No, they read it. They didn't process it. It just hit them like a rubber ball off a wall. But media messages can matter, but only in thematically framed stories. Only when the media take the time to stop doing parachute journalism, as we used to call it. Actually, we used to call it the Tribune pigeon journalism. Fly over, drop your shit, and keep going. When they actually take the time to actually delve into the details, put a personal face on this issue, then they actually start influencing people's minds when people are motivated to hear it. So is there anything that can be done? Well, whites' racial attitudes are situational, we found, or I found. It depends on their motivations, their beliefs, and it also is contextual. Depends on what type of stories they read. Unfortunately, most stories on race and African Americans focus on crime, and it tends to be episodic. And it can vary from person to person, which of course begs the question, who are these people? What are the factors that guide their racial beliefs beyond and in conjunction with media messages? Well, of course, they led to another study. Looking at elaboration likelihood and trying to explain on an issue that's more germane to what's happening now, Black Lives Matter movement. And I looked at a number of things on social media because, of course, we have we have cars, we have newspapers, we have television, we have radio, but we also have social media. And just by chance, no one reads newspapers now, which is why they're going out. How many of you picked up a newspaper today? 1, 2, 3. And they're professors, someone's like, I pulled it up from the trash can. For what? I need to set fire to something. I don't blame you. How many of you went on social media today? Yeah, even the professor's like, I was on Instagram sending hate. No, I didn't. That's why I have an alias. B. Wilson? Oh my God. Well, we thought social media would change everything. Because social media gives you the access to bond, blend, meld with people from all over the world. You could find an ally in Uzbekistan who thinks what you think. You might actually find a Spartan fan in Ann Arbor. They exist. Well, Black Lives Matter really showed us that these things matter. Media used to operate in a very top-down way. My mom, and I don't look at it, too many of y'all look like you got a black mom, but I know some of you probably know the reality. My mom used to say our relationship works in 3 parts. I say, you do, the end. And I started to tell my pops, and I was like, you know this too, don't you? I had gotten into my head that I was going to be, I was in 4th grade, and I came up to her, and I was like, Ma, we need to do this. Is this not America? Is this not a democracy? My mom looked down at me, and my mom's 5'9". So, you know, I was in 4th grade, so I was like 5'6". No. But anyway, she looked down at me, and she says, no, this is not a democracy. This is not America. This is Russia. Our relationship works in 3 parts. I say, you do, the end. And she left. I'm like, I guess I better do it because she said that's the end. Well, that's the way the media used to work. Media reported, you hear about it, that's the end. Well, social media was supposed to change that. This is the democratization of news. Anyone can make content. In fact, we could change the narrative. Black Lives Matter was mentioned almost 41 million times in 2016 alone. And while mainstream media were talking about one thing, the Twitterverse was talking about something completely different. So I wanted to determine what factors cause some people, African Americans and whites, to support or reject the Black Lives Matter movement, and how do they interpret what the media say about the issue? And why the elaboration likelihood model? Because it goes beyond just simple call and response. Because people, social tone, people lie to you. People have desires to look a certain way. I wanted to find out not just what they said, but how do they process news, and why do they think about race news stories the way they do? And why the elaboration likelihood model? For those of you who aren't in social psych, I think it was, Petty and Cacioppo. I was about to say Petty and Fazio. I'm so used to that. People process things centrally or peripherally. Centrally means if you have the cognitive ability, if you have the opportunity, you will basically take some information and evaluate it on its merits and then come up with a decision. Or you evaluate it, if those things aren't present, on the peripheral, which is you lack either knowledge about the issue or the motivation to find out, and you evaluate on the merits of an issue based on external factors like, does it mesh with what I've heard from someone else? Or how do I feel this moment, such and such, as opposed to the actual content of the message? These are hypotheses. One is a no-brainer, as you'll see. Blacks will have a more positive view. That was one of those ones where I'm like, I just have to test this, because if I don't, some journal editor will be like, well, did you ask what black people think of Black Lives Matter? And you're looking at the manuscript like, is he serious? What do you think they think? And then, since brutality is so relevant to blacks, I want to find out if it'll matter to African Americans or who will have a high opinion of Black Lives Matter regardless. However, as a more peripheral issue, and this is the part where I was really interested in, will the source of the matter to whites? Because this sort of flips things on their head. When it comes to Black Lives Matter, I'm not that concerned about being attacked by the police as opposed to some of my students. I still remember, I'm from the south side of Chicago. I remember I turned 25. I was working at corporate headquarters for Honeywell. I was like, oh, hell yeah, yes! They were like, why are you so upset? So excited. I said, I live beyond 25. I wasn't expecting that coming from Chicago. My chances of getting profiled, my chances of getting attacked, my chances have all gone down. Not exponentially, but appreciably. Whereas a Darnell, or Latron, or Shaniqua, etc., theirs go up. And which traits in audience members might explain what they think about Black Lives Matter. 541 participants, at least 21 years and older. This was a national sample. We didn't just use college students. 2 op-ed columns in which study participants were told they were written either by an African American or white college professor, an African American or white high school senior, all of whom support Black Lives Matter. The scales were social dominance orientation and the equal opportunity questionnaire, and also opinions about Black Lives Matter. And what we found, actually what I found, I don't know why I said we, I didn't write that with anybody else. Racial attitudes about Black Lives Matter are fractured along racial lines. African Americans have an unimagined, almost unprecedented support of Black Lives Matter, which is not surprising, but something I did not anticipate, and this is why you do the research, is because you can find stuff, but then you're like, whoa, wait a minute. It wasn't just that black folks liked it more, it was how much more they liked it than white folks. African Americans, 72%, yeah, that means 28% somewhere, supported Black Lives Matter compared to just 39% of whites. Now here's where it was. 39% of whites openly disliked Black Lives Matter as a movement. Some of them considered it a hate group, sort of like the Klan, the neo-Nazis, white area resistance, etc. 39% of whites openly disliked it. Only 11% of African Americans had any negative views at all on Black Lives Matter. It is literally a wedge issue. A wedge issue you could put Everest between. But when it came to the source of the issue, something that I just sort of anecdotally thought was true when I was at Honeywell, turns out to actually be true in reality. Both African Americans and whites were more likely to believe an expert on the issue. But the expert aren't the professors, aren't your parents. White professors are still more trusted, but African American teens are considered more credible. They trust what white professors will tell them, that they're informed, but who really knows what's going on? They can give us the information, but what's it actually like? How much can you believe it? Young black teens. So who the hell actually, what determines if people like this or hate this? Well, this was another part that I found to be terrifying. I didn't mention what's involved in the social dominance, orientation, skills, etc. for this reason. The people who opposed Black Lives Matter didn't just oppose Black Lives Matter. They hated all racial policies in general. They hate affirmative action. They think quotas are un-American. They have very little problem with, say, for example, legacy, which is white folks' affirmative action, which is you can get in, he can get in if your father was an alum of Michigan State. But if we say she gets in because she's poor and she's black, and she doesn't, that's a problem. They hate affirmative actions, quotas, almost anything designed to improve the lives of African Americans. They view any gain for African Americans as a loss for whites. And this is where the social dominance stuff comes in. Social dominance orientation says that we should live in a stratified society with some groups controlling other groups. And in fact, we should have it even if it means the powerful group has to keep the other group subordinate to them by force. People who oppose Black Lives Matter have strong attitudes towards social dominance. And the third thing that determines if you're going to be anti-Black Lives Matter, by highly, I usually don't write it all the way out, significant margin, being white. It's not just we hate black folks, we hate policies for black folks. We think they are not in the same league with us, and even if we have to force them back to a position of subservience, we should, and disproportionately, those people are white. I also found that when it comes to Black Lives Matter, there's central and peripheral processing with regard to racial issues. Something I found out that some of you will appreciate, some of the big wigs in social psych actually cited this piece. When I was looking it up the other day, I was like, I didn't think that person was on the planet. Holy cow. Because there's not a whole lot of work in social psych that looks at this very issue. And they found, and I found, I should say, central and peripheral processing happens with this. It's one of the very few topics, and probably the only one I don't know a lot about social psych. On racial issues, people evaluate messages based on the quality of the message and their extraneous values. In fact, the difference between prejudiced and non-prejudiced people is just that people who are racist, prejudiced, etc., they reject all claims about race and positivity in media messages. They don't even process it. They don't believe, or they can't believe, what the media state. This echoes previous research that says the difference between a racist and non-racist is not the knowledge of racism. It's your endorsement and belief in it. One of the things I do in my intercultural comm course, at the start of it, when we talk about white privilege versus whether that's a real thing or not, I'm sure just white folks in general are like, yeah, I'm sure I got some advantage in such and such and such. I actually let them find out what it's like. So I said, beginning of class, on that particular day, I said, pull out a sheet of paper. And there, some of them, paper? What's paper? Lines, blue, and a writing device, I don't care what it is. Write down all the racist things you know about black folks. Not you believe, but you just know about them. And then I put some up there, like black folks are X, Y, and Z, and I have them write it all down. I said, now don't put your name on it, because I'm gonna read these aloud in class. So they put them all down, they put them all down, they put them all down. And then I read them aloud. Black folks are here just for affirmative action. They smell that women have too many babies. They're niggers, niggers, niggers. And after you read, and it's a couple hundred people in the class, and after you read that a lot, you literally can hear oxygen flowing through the room. It is that quiet. And I say, you know what white privilege is? Every black student knows this. They know it, you know it, they know the teacher knows it. You know who knows it the most? They do. In fact, you want to know who knows the most about stereotypes? The people that they're leveled against. Period. They know every single one of them. And they know that before they write anything, before they say anything, before they do anything in class, you're just writing a paper. They're trying to disconfirm these stereotypes. Now, the point of this, and me bringing it up in this context, is it isn't that everyone who wrote all those things believes it, but they know it. The difference between a racist and a non-racist, I mean, the fact that they're taking my class and it's an elective and it's no newsflash, I'm black, shows that they're not outright racist. It doesn't show that they don't know anything about racism. It's that they don't believe it, and that's what the research shows. So is there anything that can be done? Well, for those people, what we find are people who are moved by media messages. And as we talked about, a strong orientation towards social dominance are modern racists and more likely are white. Which of course begs the question, can anything actually be done? Well, possibly. Well, people learn from media. Media cultivate large swaths of the population. Now they portray groups. And strangely, social media hasn't done a damn thing. There's a study that came out that said, you know, of the actual social network, you know, the friends you choose to have, not the ones you're forced to have because they're in the same class with you, 75% of whites out of 100 friends have 0 black friends. The other 25% only have 1 out of 100. So in short, you can do it yourself if you go home. Go on Facebook. If you got 1,400 friends, other than the folks you met at OSU that you had to meet, if you don't have 14 black friends, guess what? Black folks have 8 friends out of 100. Woo-hoo! It sounds amazing until you factor in that 78% of the population is white. Blacks segregate themselves from whites, and whites self-segregate themselves from blacks. So is there anything that can be done? I did a paper, another solo author, titled Righting the Wrong. Can counter stereotypes, positive news about black folks, change people's perceptions of black criminal suspects? And the hypothesis was, of course, You give a white suspect a black suspect per the black criminal stereotype, they might think more of the white suspect. But what happens when we actually talk about black suspect changed his life around, the white suspect changed his life around? Some research talks about the fact that when white folks find somebody who counters the stereotype, they tend to figuratively bend over backward, trying to accommodate and talk about how wonderful this person is. You've probably heard it before. You speak so well. And even Chris Rock joked about, well, of course Barack speaks well. He fucking went to Harvard. And he was in the Harvard Law Review. But he breaks their stereotype. Study design was a racist suspect, black or white, times 3, counter stereotypes, non-crime related counter stereotypes, 150 college students. And here were the stimuli. They read a story about someone, either African American or white convict, who turned his life around after going to prison. Non-crime related counter stereotype, read a story about someone from the inner city who overcame the odds and earned an Ivy League degree and started a business in his hometown. Then they read a non-counter stereotype story. Here's what I found. Even when you look at counter stereotypes, people have more favorable views of whites than they do of blacks, even when they're criminals. Counter stereotypes do work, but not with relation to crime. Which sounds, on the surface, positive. Well, we could change people's minds about groups. We just can't change their opinion about black criminals. Problem is, almost all of the coverage of African Americans is about black criminals. But one positive that you can take about this is that since there was no effect for the stereotype condition that did not involve crime, it says that we can change people's minds about media, with using media. The fear that people have of black folks often is of black plus criminality. What we ultimately have to do is unpair those two. If we talk about blacks positively, without connection to crime, we might be able to change the perceptions of people like me and some of your friends when you see them in general, if we just talk about them in general and not just in connection to crime. Because what we know about media effects on race so far is people talk about crime. People are afraid of crime. People are afraid of black criminals. And this is true even on people who are considered to be the most egalitarian, people in the most diverse environments that they will ever be in, which is college. Right now, at The Ohio State University, we always talk about, oh man, we need to increase our diversity, such and such and such. And I came there and I said, man, this looks like Jamaica compared to Indiana. And Indiana was like the south side of Chicago compared to Minnesota. I graduated in 1993. University of Minnesota had 55,000 students. We had 1,200 students of color, which is all the blacks, all the Hispanics, all the Native American combined. But this is the most diverse place most people will ever be. Because media prime people to talk about topics, and they prime people to think of people in certain ways. When we discuss blacks only in connection with criminality, it's not surprising that when people hear black, they think crime. And when they think crime, they don't envision embezzling. They envision the crime of knocking upside the head. It tends to engender a feeling of fear, apprehension, concern. But we don't talk about the fact that right now there's a record number of African American, particularly African American men in college, more so than there are in prison. My future steps is I need to figure out how we get the media to change that. Figure out what triggers folks with relation to crime. I also want to look beyond just African Americans. African Americans have made it back up to 13% of the population, which sounds fabulous. If you looked in 1950, you know what we were? 13% of the population. 17% of the population is Hispanic. In 2050, 44% of the population will be white. It'll still be the largest group because there'll be Granted, there'll be 57% of something, 56% of something else, but there'll be no group, be it Asian, Somali, Black, that's bigger than 44. But we need to learn more about more different groups, so we conceptually don't become the equivalent of South Africa in the 80s, and we become the America of the 2050s. Also, look at women. 51% of the population is women. 51% of the population creates 100% of the population. Next, you're at Spartan Stadium, especially at night, look around and think, a woman created every single person. I mean, not one woman, obviously. And I feel sorry for her. I have 2 kids, and I'm still like, man, I can't believe we got 2 kids. My mom had 5. And I'm the 5th. Woo-hoo. Look at what happens to women. Women are still de facto treated as second-class citizens. Right now, we have a woman in the audience, 4th person in the 50-plus years of AJMC to get the top award for, what was it?
The Deutschman.
The Deutschman. I knew I was going to butcher the word, so I didn't even want to try it. You think we haven't had women actually in journalism? Smartest people I know. I always tell in my class, guess what? Highest scoring person's class is going to be a woman. She's going to be some woman who's going to sit in the middle, say nothing, and hope you don't call on her. Happens all the time. But women are treated as second-class citizens. So there needs to be more research done on them as well, and I'm hoping to do that. And examine other factors like ethnic identity that also have an influence on racial attitudes and stuff that's used often in health communication. Because along with this diversity, ethnic identity looks at your buy-in to your racial group, not just, hey, I'm black, that's why I think X, Y, and Z. Newsflash, Ben Carson, technically black. Got the But how much does that buy-in to that group actually influence what you think? HealthCom says it's a better predictor of attitudes than actual race. More research needs to be on that. Speaking of research, thus far our published paper we talked about was in JMCQ, Frame and Blame, Agenda 6, Elaboration Likelihood Model, Journalism Practice, even some stuff on journalism education, National Geographic, on the importance of teaching this very topic. Self and identity, more than black-white issues, and COM study taking a closer look at the factors that influence that very topic, ethnic identity. And looking at people's willingness to stay silent, and I didn't mention that because it's 45 minutes talking about a 45-day talk. Your willingness to self-censor, like when you see something racist on social media, how likely are you to speak out on it or be quiet? And is it influenced by the amount of people you have who are non-white in your social media? But these are indeed dark times. Black Lives Matter is still an issue, and in fact, the next slide is Ron DeSantis. If you've ever heard the name or see the name, it's because he's the governor of Florida, one of our most populous states. Ron DeSantis won the governorship against a black guy, and he literally had robocalls with people making ape sounds, mocking his opponent, talking about he's subhuman, sort of like a monkey, and he won. These are indeed dark times because this is already a wedge issue for 2020. And it was a wedge issue, not just because of Donald Trump. These issues have been existing long before Trump. Newsflash, blacks have been here 400 plus years. Longer than the Italians, longer than the Poles, longer than the Jews, longer than any group except for the Spaniards. You know, Cristobal Colon, who, showed his maleness. Well, you know what? I'm gonna go to Asia by traveling west. I'm lost. We have been here for centuries, and slavery predates this country. Slavery actually started in 1620, 156 years before the United States. And we still haven't figured out how to deal with black folks. Trump just basically put a spigot in that well of hate and let it pour. It's nothing new. But it is hella productive. This is the racial breakdown from the 2016 election. 88% of blacks, 65% of Latinos, 65% of Asians, 56% of any other race. Everybody who wasn't white voted against him, and this guy still, people, well, he didn't win the electoral college, he got 50 million votes. That should alarm you more than whatever the electoral college says. This has existed long before Trump, and it's going to manifest even greater next year through Trump. I have a mentoring group called The How that I started on my own, called the Holt Official Watch List. Mentor students of color and women to help them get into graduate school or whatever they think is their next level. And I use this slogan for it, and I use it with relation to our race. Race relations, race studies. We have to deal with this. Because as I tell the kids all the time with relation to this, if not us, who? If not here, because this is the place, we are the future leaders of the country. You're at Michigan State. You know what that means? You're going to be elite. 28% of the people in the United States get a four-year college degree. Not from Harvard, Yale, but anywhere four-year school, which means more than 7 out of 10 don't. People who will be in management are here. Michigan State, Ohio State, Tennessee, Wisconsin, Missouri. If not here, where will the difference be made? And if not now, when? Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time for us to start dealing with this and start talking about this. Because right now, we're in the aftermath of a black woman playing a video game in her house with her nephew, got shot to death. A man eating ice cream, watching a video game, eating pizza, watching a video game. An officer came in, shot him dead. What should disturb you the most about this whole thing isn't that she was convicted or anything like that, but why the hell did this even go to trial? You walk in someone's house. Could you imagine a black man walking to a white woman's house and shooting her dead and not trying to plea bargain out of that? You did wrong. You went into a wrong house, pulled out a gun, and shot an unarmed man in the head. But you knew there's a chance that I could get off because of who I am and because of who he is. That shouldn't have even gone to trial, but it did. If not us, who? If not here, where? If not now, when? Two lawyers representing 54-year-old Eric Logan shot and killed in South Bend. That's Buttigieg's area, presidential candidate. In case you missed it, this was a week ago. 66 black men and boys, often unarmed, shot by the police. You think there's going to be charges? Probably not. Because all the police need to do is make up a reason to say they're justified and they fear for their lives. Why do they fear for their lives when they look at me and not you? Think about all the spree shooters and think about the fact that they're all taken alive unless they kill themselves, and think of what they look like. This issue isn't going away anytime soon. We have to deal with it, we have to make a difference, and now is the time. Speaking of, thank you for your time, and as always, let's start.
We have time for a few questions.
Yes.
So thank you for this fabulous talk. It was, so I do a lot of research in tobacco control and health disparities. And one of the things that we've struggled with experimentally in designing effective messages is that there are marginalized groups that experience disproportionate rates of lung cancer and other negative outcomes related to tobacco. For example, African American communities which smoke higher levels of menthol cigarettes, even though they smoke less often, are more susceptible, probably because of the impacts of menthol.
Oh yeah.
As we talk,
reports. Continue.
But as we talk about policy as a way to reduce these disparities, for example, banning menthol in cigarettes, it's really, which has been in terms of public health, it's very accepted. It's, this is like a great idea. We all think it's great. But the studies that we do to figure out how to frame menthol so that policymakers or so that the larger public will accept a menthol ban have been largely unsuccessful, right? Because the argument is we've made lots of, but what should we do? Like,
Who's your audience that you're trying to target?
well, it depends on the study.
Because you got a couple issues that's your big problem. Number one, even if you were successful, you're fighting against probably the second most powerful behind the gun lobby band group there is.
For
Big
sure.
Tobacco, I mean, Philip Morris, people have no idea how big the tobacco industry is. You don't see tobacco on television, you don't see tobacco ads on TV, you don't see people doing it, it's still a multi-billion-dollar corporation. In general.
So a lot of this work was in states that had the ability to have referendums.
Yeah.
So that the goal was to increase general public support in order to create a referendum at the state level. So that was a couple of the studies we did were in that sort of context. I mean, the ideal would be to figure out how to interface better with, so the FDA Center for Tobacco Products does a bunch of this policy work, but of course the tobacco industry sits at the table there. And so it's to work around the industry influence at the federal level, and so we would have to go to senators. But the notion was to be in referendum states, right, so that we could.
So is your question, how do we get it on the ballot?
I guess my question
Or how do you
is,
get the audience to understand and
how do you
care
get the
about it?
audience to understand and care about it?
Are you actually going to the black community?
Well, it's not an issue with getting the black community to support this policy. So almost always when we've done like qualitative data and then we've used that to create frames, we get relative buy-in from African Americans, from Hispanics, from.
Have you used visuals?
Well, so that's part of so that's the big debate, right? Like, how can we use visuals in a way that will be effective? So we haven't, and so
You should.
So how do I do that?
How do you use visuals?
No, I mean we a lot of the research on images. So my concern had been we'd been using a lot of text. Was that if we start putting images in, what's the best? So like the Truth Campaign, for example, uses images of young adult African Americans who are well dressed and they're standing in a context and that's been effective for some groups, but there's also been some boomerang effects for some of their studies in like sort of like middle class white populations. So what's the right types of images to use so that we can avoid some of those boomerang effects?
What I would do is I would use the images of actually some of the victims.
Yeah.
And I would use the images of some of the victims in the venues that people who are most likely to have some influence actually read.
Okay.
And when you use visuals, it's sort of like, I better stop laying on this thing before I'm laying on this thing. It's sort of like teaching, where if you put up a whole bunch of pictures, people will look at the pictures, but you put a bunch of pictures and words that look at neither.
Right.
Use few words, talk about the effect. It's sort of like the Mind on Drugs ads back in the 1980s and 90s. You use the skillet, this is your mind on drugs, such and such and such.
Right.
I would use very graphic images, very few words, talk about the effect, and you have an incredible story to tell when you look at the rate of death.
Right. I mean,
And you could talk about even some of the health disparities in some of it, because as I said before, no one wants to be considered racist.
yeah.
If you talk about the health disparities, I mean, the fact that African Americans die disproportionately at like almost a 4-to-1 rate of cancer.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and you could talk about that very thing, because then the other side, the only rebuttal they have is that, well, that's because they get referred at only 1/4 the ratio of this, that, and the other. And the medical community is going to come to your aid.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's.
So that's what I would do.
Okay. Thank you.
So. Anybody else?
Maybe one more question before we segue down the hall to lunch. Johannes?
But I want to let a student go first. You go.
But is there a student?
I thought you had a question right here, didn't you? Oh, you did?
Me?
Yeah, I thought you put your hand up.
I kind of do. I was just trying to think of how to phrase it. And so when I moved to America 3 years ago, I had to take basically crash courses with friends how to like navigate the American society. And you talk a lot about media effects and like how media are to be used to basically educate.
Yes.
What would be, or do you think there would be a benefit moving some parts of that research, for example, also into other countries
Oh, yeah.
that don't have the societal confounds to some degree that America
Yes.
faces with like people generally thinking to isolate media effects.
Yes,
Because
it would be
I-
actually a lot easier, I would guess.
Yeah, because I had most of my knowledge beforehand
Yeah,
from
Yeah.
TV, and like when I'm talking to my friends right now back in Germany,
yeah.
we're talking about very, very different topics, and they're like, "Wait, that's crazy. This is like on your news. Like, why didn't I hear about these things?" I'm like, "Well, filtered." And so, do you think that basically the media effects research would be more beneficial, generally speaking?
Yes.
I mean, in that
It
specific
would be a
topic,
whole
yes,
lot more
but
beneficial. In fact, and I'll wrap this up quickly because I can tell need me to finish. Research shows that the group that has the most negative opinions about African Americans are first-generation Asians. The main reason is because the only opinion they have on us comes from the media. Whereas white folks might be like, yeah, I know Malik, he's my best friend. So if you went someplace, say for example, where they didn't have any of that negativity, you're starting from ground zero, and you're actually building as opposed to counteracting. So yeah, I couldn't see it being anything but more effective. So.
All right, let's thank Lanier again.